On a humid July morning in 1969, more than 500 million people around the world held their breath, staring at glowing television screens, waiting to see whether three men inside a fragile metal capsule would make history or vanish forever into the silent darkness of space. The story truly began long before that morning, in a tense world divided by fear and competition. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in what historians would later call the Cold War, a struggle not fought only with weapons, but with ideas, technology, and prestige. Whoever could dominate space would prove their scientific superiority to the world. In October 1957, the Soviet Union shocked Americans by launching Sputnik 1, the world's first artificial satellite. It was no bigger than a beach ball, yet its steady beeping signal echoing from orbit struck fear deep into American hearts. If the Soviets could send a satellite into space, many Americans wondered, what else could they send? A nuclear weapon? A surveillance device? Schools rushed to improve science education. Congress funded new research programs. The United States was determined not to fall behind. Just a year later, in 1958, the U.S. government created the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, better known as NASA. Its mission was clear: catch up and surpass the Soviet Union in space exploration. At first, progress came slowly. Early rockets failed spectacularly. Some exploded seconds after launch. Others veered off course. Engineers worked around the clock, learning from each failure. Then, in April 1961, the Soviets struck again. A young pilot named Yuri Gagarin became the first human to orbit Earth. His smiling face appeared in newspapers around the world. In the United States, it felt like another defeat. Only weeks later, the American response came from the highest office in the land. In May 1961, President John F. Kennedy stood before Congress and delivered a bold challenge. He declared that the United States would send a man to the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade ended. At the time, this goal seemed almost impossible. No human had traveled beyond Earth orbit. Computers were massive machines that filled entire rooms, yet had less power than modern smartphones. Still, Kennedy's vision ignited a national mission. Thousands of scientists, engineers, and technicians across the United States joined the effort. Entire towns grew around NASA facilities. One of the most important centers rose near Houston, Texas, where engineers developed the spacecraft that would carry astronauts to the moon. In Florida, workers built the enormous rockets that would launch them. The rocket designed for the lunar mission was called the Saturn V. It stood taller than a 36-story building and weighed more than 6 million pounds when fully fueled. Its power was unimaginable. At liftoff, it produced more thrust than 85 Hoover Dam turbines combined. By the late 1960s, the United States had made remarkable progress. Astronauts had orbited Earth, walked in space, and tested docking maneuvers between spacecraft. Yet tragedy struck on January 27, 1967. During a ground test, a fire erupted inside the Apollo 1 capsule, killing astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. The nation mourned. NASA engineers halted missions and redesigned the spacecraft to improve safety. The tragedy made the goal even more urgent, but also more dangerous. Finally, after years of testing and preparation, NASA selected 3 astronauts for the mission that would attempt to land on the moon: Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins. Armstrong, a quiet former Navy pilot, had a reputation for calm thinking under pressure. Aldrin, an engineer with a doctorate from MIT, specialized in space navigation. Collins would remain in orbit around the moon, while Armstrong and Aldrin descended to its surface. On July 16, 1969, crowds gathered along the beaches near Cape Kennedy in Florida. Families brought blankets, cameras, and radios.
Some had driven hundreds of miles just to witness history. At 9:32 a.m. Eastern Time, the Saturn V roared to life. Flames and smoke billowed from beneath the rocket as it slowly lifted from the launch pad. The ground trembled like an earthquake. Millions watched on television as the rocket climbed into the sky, trailing a brilliant white plume. Inside the spacecraft, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins felt the intense vibration of engines burning thousands of gallons of fuel every second. As the rocket cleared the atmosphere, the shaking eased. Soon, the astronauts experienced weightlessness, floating gently inside the cabin. For 3 days, Apollo 11 traveled toward the moon. The astronauts conducted system checks, took photographs, and prepared for the landing. Meanwhile, on Earth, NASA engineers monitored every detail from Mission Control in Houston. Rows of specialists watched glowing screens filled with numbers. Every calculation mattered. A tiny error could mean disaster. On July 20, 1969, the spacecraft reached lunar orbit. Armstrong and Aldrin climbed into the lunar module, a spindly craft called Eagle. Collins remained in the command module, Columbia, circling above. With a final check, Eagle separated and began its descent. Immediately, problems appeared. Warning alarms flashed inside the cockpit. The onboard computer signaled overload errors. Back in Mission Control, engineers scrambled to interpret the data. After 10 seconds, they determined that the computer could continue operating. The landing proceeded. As Eagle approached the surface, Armstrong looked out the window and saw that the automatic landing system was guiding them towards a field of boulders. If they touched down there, the fragile legs of the module could collapse. Taking manual control, Armstrong steered the craft to a safer location. Fuel levels dropped rapidly. Mission Control informed him that less than a minute of fuel remained. Then, at 4:17 p.m. Eastern Time, Armstrong spoke the words that would echo through history. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Cheers erupted in Mission Control. Engineers hugged one another. Across the United States, people wept, laughed, and applauded. Humanity had reached another world. Hours later, Armstrong prepared to exit the lunar module. Television cameras transmitted grainy black and white images to Earth. More than 600 million viewers, 1/5 of the world's population, watched the broadcast. Slowly, Armstrong descended the ladder. As his boot touched the dusty surface, he delivered a phrase carefully chosen before the mission. "That's one small step for man,